Welcome to Land Eco Lightning Talks and Thinking Like a Landscape with Dr. Kevin McGarrigle. For this three-part mini-series on working with landscapes, in this first part, I'll discuss the importance of asking a good pattern process question. In part two, I'll talk about the steps involved in formally defining a landscape. And in step three, I'll talk about the importance of landscape definition. Okay, let's get started. One of the questions I'm often asked is, what is the most important step in conducting a landscape analysis? And invariably, my answer is stating a very clear pattern process question at a specific scale. There's no question in my mind that this is simply the most important step. No meaningful landscape analysis can be done without a really good pattern process question. And the question should clearly discern a specific pattern and process relationship at one or more relevant scales. And as you may recall from the first Lightning Talk series on the landscape concept, a landscape can be defined at any scale, so long as there is a clear pattern that relates to a clear process. It is the pattern process relationship that ultimately makes a landscape and defines the landscape problem. So for example, as shown in this figure, we might define the pattern process relationship at several different scales. In the stand level scale shown on the left, the pattern is based on the spatial arrangement of canopy trees and openings. And the process is goshawk foraging habitat quality. So there's a clear pattern that relates to a clear process and happens to be at a fairly local scale, but nonetheless, there's a clear pattern and process relationship that makes it a relevant landscape and landscape problem. In the middle, at the project level scale, and this is a project in the sense of a classic NEPA project on a national forest, we have a pattern in surface fuels and how that may relate to fire behavior, such as the risk of high severity fire. So again, we have a clear pattern and process in this case at a slightly coarser scale. And then on the right, we have at the district level, we have a pattern defined by canopy cover classes ranging from low to high canopy cover, and a process here that is undefined, but could be any number of things, ranging from habitat quality for a number of different focal species to overall biodiversity, et cetera, et cetera. In all of these cases, the important thing is that we have a clear pattern and process relationship identified at a specific scale. And this essentially forms the basis for any landscape analysis. Once we have a pattern process, it's necessary to translate that into a specific objective. And we need a specific objective in order to guide the formal landscape definition in the next step. One of the most useful ways to think about a useful objective is using the SMART acronym. The SMART acronym refers to objectives that are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. And a SMART objective allows us to create a detailed, specific, and quantitative objective that provides the necessary guidance to clearly define the landscape in the next step of the process. And importantly, a SMART objective allows for effectiveness monitoring, which is the key to successful adaptive management. This is best understood by example. In this first example, we have a goal, a broad goal, to restore the ecological integrity of grassland ecosystems embedded within the forested matrix. Now, this goal is a broad statement of a problem, but it doesn't give us the details that we need to formally define the landscape. We must first translate that into a specific pattern and process and a SMART objective. There's lots of alternatives here, but as an example, on the pattern side of the equation here, we could specify that our interest is in the extent and configuration of functional grasslands within the forested matrix across the forest. Of course, we would subsequently need to elaborate on what we mean by configuration. We would need to elaborate on what we mean by a functional grassland. We would need to formally define what constitutes the forested matrix, and of course, what qualifies as the extent of the quote forest. But all of these things could be specified subsequently in a SMART objective. The key here is that we have a pattern that it relates clearly to the specified goal. An alternative pattern could be the extent and configuration of tree cover within individual grassland patches distributed throughout the forest. So once again, we would need to elaborate on configuration. We would need to elaborate on what we mean exactly by tree cover. We would need to elaborate on what we mean and how we intend to define grassland patches. And again, the extent here of the forest would need to be defined. But clearly, we have a pattern here that relates to the goal. On the process side of the equation, there are many possibilities here. An example could be the process could be the viability of grassland-dependent plant and animal populations, which is pretty broad, but nonetheless describes why we care about the extent and configuration of functional grasslands or of tree cover within grassland patches. It's because we care about the grassland-dependent plant and animal populations and their viability. Alternatively, a process could be groundwater recharge, where we're interested in the effect that trees within these grassland patches have on groundwater recharge because of their use of water in evapotranspiration and essentially the loss of groundwater recharge by having tree cover within these grassland patches. And of course, there are many other processes here. The key here is that we have a pattern and we have a process here that relates to our overarching goal. And in order to guide the formal specification of a landscape, we have to generate something more specific. We need to generate a SMART objective. In this case, an example could be to reduce encroached tree cover to less than 10% within historical grassland patches as defined, embedded within the forested matrix, such that the extent and configuration of restored grasslands is within the historical range of variability as measured by a comprehensive suite of landscape metrics within 10 years. And as with the broad pattern and process statement on the previous slide, the objective here also would require some step-down definitions in order to formally define the landscape and conduct the landscape analysis. So for example, we would need to choose specific landscape metrics. We would need to define what qualifies as a grassland. We would need to define what we mean by historical grassland ecosystem patches, etc. Let's evaluate whether this meets the SMART criteria for an objective. Is it specific? Yes. We're talking about tree cover within grassland systems. Is it measurable? Yes, assuming we have appropriate data, whether it's based on field data or remotely sensed data. It's certainly something we can measure. Is it attainable? Yes, we have tools, mechanical tools, tree removal, for example, or tools such as prescribed fire that would allow us to remove tree cover from grasslands. Is it relevant? Well, certainly, if one is interested in functional grassland systems, then this is a highly relevant objective. And is it time-based? Yes, because we've specified that we need to meet this objective within 10 years. As another example, our goal could be to restore the resiliency of ponderosa pine and mixed conifer forest to wildfire disturbances. Again, a broad statement of interest here that has a pattern process problem embedded within it, but we need to elaborate further and identify the specific pattern and process here we're interested in. On the pattern side, it could be something as simple as the extent and configuration of fine fuels within and across the forest. Now, of course, we'd have to define configuration, we'd have to define what we mean by fine fuels, we'd have to define the extent of the forest, etc. On the process side, it could be wildfire disturbance behavior and the risk of high severity fire. Or alternatively, it could be Mexican spotted owl nest or roost habitat, or many other possibilities as well. The key here is that we have a pattern that relates to a process that in combination address our stated goal. But as in the previous example, in order to guide the formal definition of a landscape in the next step of the process, we need a more specific objective. We need ideally a SMART objective. In this case, our objective could be to reduce fine fuel loads as defined and their continuity within ponderosa pine and mixed conifer forest, such that the extent and configuration of fine fuels is within the historical range of variability as measured by a comprehensive suite of landscape metrics within 10 years. Again, there are a number of components of this objective that would need to be elaborated on further in the next step of the process, but we have a rather detailed statement here of what we are trying to achieve with regards to the pattern and process problem. Is it a SMART objective? Well, is it specific? Yes, we're talking about fine fuels, which of course we must define, but we know we're trying to map and analyze fine fuel loads. Is it measurable? Yes, as long as we have the field and or remotely sensed data to map those fuels, we can achieve this objective. Is it attainable? Yes, we have the tools, both mechanical and prescribed burning techniques that allow us to change the fine fuel loads and their continuity across the forest. Is it relevant? Well, certainly. If one's interested in the fine fuel mosaic and its relationship to fire behavior, for example, then it's highly relevant. Is it time-based? Yes, because we stated that we would need to achieve this objective within 10 years. So the most important thing to recognize here is that without a clear pattern process question and SMART objective, it's essentially garbage in and garbage out in the landscape analysis. No landscape analysis can be meaningful without a very clear pattern process question and without a very SMART objective that is sufficiently detailed and specific and quantitative for us to formally define the landscape and proceed with the landscape analysis in the next step. So remember, we're taking the real world and we're constructing a landscape from a particular perspective, looking through a particular lens at a particular scale to frame a specific pattern process problem, and then proceed with the definition of the landscape and the analysis to ultimately answer the question of interest. So the take-home message from this presentation is, once again, without a clear pattern process question and objective, it's garbage in, garbage out. Specifically, a landscape cannot be defined until a specific pattern process question has been asked or a SMART objective stated at a specific scale. And landscape definition is the next step in the process and the focus of the next talk in this mini-series. Also, formulating the question or the objective at a relevant scale is the most important step in any landscape assessment. Don't forget that, and don't ever underestimate the importance of starting with a very clear pattern process question and objective. Well, this is Dr. Kevin McGarrigle signing off from this episode of Land Eco Lightning Talks. I hope this talk has been helpful, and I hope you join me for my next lightning talk. In the meantime, keep on thinking like a landscape.